Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good afternoon, council. Yeah, thank you for being available tonight so we can have another budget work session. I know after the last meeting, Councilmember Zulawaga and I were able to go through the budget and have a great discussion actually on a lot of the budget and several of the items in here. So what I've done for tonight is based on our conversation, I've made up a presentation on a lot of the items that we've discussed. Some of them were items that I think could be a little bit more clear in the budget presentation itself. And then some of them were just when you go through it with the fine tooth comb, sometimes it's nice to have another set of eyes. So we were able to identify a couple of things that need to be corrected. So I have put this together, and then there will be time for discussion at the end if I've missed anything, which it's possible.
One note that I'd like to make, council, is that your fellow council member, Councilmember Neal is on Zoom, and I haven't seen Nakai yet.
I just had a text from Catherine. She is stuck in traffic in Dallas and still has grandkids to get, and so she's probably not going to be able to
Okay.
join us tonight.
So just to make sure that you know Rusty is on.
Evening, Rusty.
Guys,
Rusty, if you have something to inject, please just interrupt us.
will do. I know how difficult it is, but Catherine and I have done
Yes,
this
Rusty?
a few times. We'll just blurt it out. I
There you-
apologize up front if I step on somebody when you're speaking.
All right, so the format of the presentation is going to go in order of the budget. So I have put page numbers on the top of several of the slides. So you can follow along in the budget if you would like to, but I have put most of it into the presentation itself. All right, so on page 13 of the budget, we show the general fund percentage of revenue by type. And with speaking with Councilmember Zulawaga, he thought it would be beneficial if we broke out the sales tax revenue from the actual total taxes. So in the budget itself, we only show the taxes as one lump sum. So I have presented here what the general fund revenues look like. This first slide shows including the 1.09% sales tax. The second slide shows it without. So you can see in the original budget, 80% is allocated to taxes. And when you break it out, 61% of our total revenue comes from sales tax, 15% comes from property tax. Sorry, can't see on my sheet here. 12% comes from other operating and transfers, and then everything else is below 5%. And then when you go to the next slide, you can see if we take the 1.09% sales tax out, it drops the sales tax to 50%, property tax increases to 19%, operating transfers goes up to 15%, and then intergovernmental is 6%, and everything else is below 5%. So that does, I think, give a little bit of a greater insight into where our tax revenues come from and the different sources that we have. So I think going forward, we probably will change that in the budget presentation because I think it does show a little bit more detail on that. Any questions on that one?
Well, just a clarification, the 1.09% you have removed is the actual pass-through sales tax that goes to the school district, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
So technically, the second slide is more representative of our actual revenues for the city. All right, the next slide I have is the property taxes. So now we have more clarity on Proposition HH. So we actually can have real numbers for the budget, which is fantastic. Who doesn't like that? So based on the last meeting, council did give a consensus for 2.5 mil reduction, and that would be in the form of a credit. So based on that figure, if we use 13.25 mils on the 173,573,000, we would have a property tax revenue of $2,299,852. And if we go to the next slide, you can see how that will then translate into what the fund balance will look like for the city. So based on that number, the fund balance reserve would be 21.39%. Which is $551,102 above the 17% reserve that we've set. And then if we go to the next slide, for transparency and just clarity, I've been presenting it this way all throughout the budget process. So one last time, now that we have the property tax settled, on what it's going to be. This is the total breakdown. In bold there, I have the 13.25 mils, which is a 2.5 mill levy reduction. That is $433,934 returned to the taxpayers, which leaves the fund balance reserve at 21.39%. Before we have any discussion on this, if any is wanted, this next slide shows how much it will return to the average taxpayer. So at 13.25 mils, that's $88.01 returned to the average taxpayer. The council wish to have any discussion on this piece?
Slide before finds out what the change in the return to taxpayers column would be depending on that.
Correct, yes. All right, and so moving on to the next slide. So several of the next slides are going to be items that Councilmember Zuluaga pointed out. I appreciate it very much. There were a couple of items that we did not, we failed to draw out into the front piece where we show in the budget what new SLRs we've added to the budget, what budget adds have been. So on page 44 under information technology, we failed to call out that professional services, there was an add of $12,500. This is for our network architect that's working on transitioning our services from Peak Internet, which is now Vero Broadband, to TDS, and some other networking engineering that we're doing in terms of servers and network security. So we did fail to put that in here, and so we're going to add that, but this is drawing it out for you so you can see that there was an add in the budget that we missed putting in the front sheets.
Aaron, before you leave that question,
Sure.
all the numbers that you previously showed us, that has the 12.5 already subtracted out, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
12,500, correct. All right, on page 47 of the budget, under non-departmental, there was a question about the visitor center, which is account 100-199-2090. In the budget, we have $20,000 programmed, and it looks like that's been that way since 2021. And there was a question about why that amount is still there and if that was the intention to leave it. And I was hoping if council could provide any history on that, if there's a recollection. I did get some information from Michael on it, but I wanted to make sure. His understanding was that in 2020, the budget amount was 42,400, and that it was reduced to 20,000 because the visitor center contract was, I guess, canceled at the time, and then it was going to be postponed to a later date to determine if we would bring that service back. The 20,000 that's still in there, 12,000 of it is being used for the weather camera that's on top of the cultural center. And that's considered kind of a nexus to tourism. So I think that's why it's being charged out of that account. But in terms of whether Councilmember Zuluaga believed that it was supposed to originally be zero for the visitor center, and I don't know if the budget was kept in there simply for the camera or if there was some other intention for it, if anybody has any thoughts on it.
I do recall quite a bit about this discussion where it went from 42 down to 20. We put out an RFP, I think there were 2 proposals. One was felt to be non-responsive. The other one, I don't think we decided to go forward with it. So the 20,000 just sat there from my memory. As you were looking at that 12,000 projection, that must have been used for the camera out of that line item, because we didn't specifically talk about it being a camera item. I'm fine with it being spent on the camera, but why we still have the 20,000, I agree with Robert, that may want to come down to 12 because we've never awarded that new contract.
But, and that was my recollection as well. Two RFPs went out, and one of those was to Main Street. But previously, the chamber had that contract and they could, in theory, we could do another RFP for the visitor center because the visitor center is really being operated under the good graces of the Chamber of Commerce. There is no contract for a visitor center any longer. So do
Right.
we want to do away with that line item? I don't know. I would leave that to the consensus of the council, but why the 20,000 was left there, I don't know. But originally, the 42,000 was for a visitor center operation.
Correct. Hey, Carol, do you remember, or do you know, we give the chamber some sort of a break on the space. I think it was kind of a quid pro quo where they get like $1 a month or $1 a year to be able to use the space, and that's why they're operating it, something like that. I don't remember all the exacts. Do you?
I don't, I'm sure Kelly can recall. I
Um,
hope.
They've occupied that space for quite some time, as long as I
Yeah.
can remember. And the city provides that space to them, and they also operate our visitor center. And they have continued to operate the visitor center as they did before. And the city has not contributed funds towards that for several years. And I think we left it, I don't remember the why, but I do know that there was some competing interests. One of them being Main Street, and Main Street has not really been revived yet from going on sabbatical. And maybe that's a conversation that the council could have at a time in the future. But there's no contract right now. I think the weather cameras, they use them on the news stations as well.
Correct.
So I think they serve a purpose, because we don't have those UPass cams anymore. There's been a conversation going on online about whatever happened to those, and those went away when Jason Baker sold Peak Internet.
The Baldwin still runs from past. I don't know.
What does council think about keeping the 12,000 instead of going straight to just 12,000, maybe bump it up to something like 15,000, so we recoup at least 5,000 of it and have that in there should there be, a little assistance asked by the chamber for the running of the visitor center, just a couple $1,000 just to offset some of their costs for doing that for us.
Rusty, before we start talking about allocations, let me talk about what I remember, if I can,
Oh,
about
sure,
the.
I'm sorry.
And that's all right. So what I remember is that we did put an RFP out. I think Jan Wilson was one of the people. I specifically remember Main Street said they were not interested in doing it. And I forget who that second one was from. I thought it was an association or some group of folks.
It was,
Do you remember who it was?
yeah, it was,
Darlene.
no, it
No.
was a gentleman, I can't think of his
Was it
name,
Bob?
he used to be on the board with me at T-Crafts years ago. Give me a minute and I'll remember his name, but they did not respond in an acceptable fashion. Their response to the RFP was insufficient, is a better
And-
word.
So I think the rest of my recollection on that, Rusty, was that the reason that we removed the item is because that the visitor center was not open on Saturday or Sunday, which was the general time of folks would be coming through town to use it. And that there was some in the business community who felt that the chamber running it wasn't accurately reflecting their interests. So their brochures, et cetera, were not available through the chamber's visitor center model. So it was removed, the RFP was done, and I think what happened was the chamber came in and said something to the effect, don't quote me, but I think it was something like, well, fine, we'll do it for nothing. So they were going to do it for free. And so I don't think we ever did remove any allocation to have somebody else run it. And we still haven't solved it. And I think it's kind of been put on the back burner because we were looking at having either an economic development officer or Main Street being revisited or whatever. So I think the issue of the chamber utilizing this space without charge is probably another item that we'll address at some point. I know you're looking at revenues for the visitor center, but it just begs the question, what's the rationale for that? So anyway, I don't think that has to be changed as a budget item at this point, but I hope staff will look into that in future in terms of contracts. And
Well-
as far as the $20,000, why don't we just put it in there? Change the item from being visitor center to being cameras and be at 12,000.
Okay.
I don't have any disagreement with that. I will, make one correction though is that when the chamber agreed to continue operating the visitor center, which exists in the building, they did make the statement then that they could not operate it over the weekend, especially if they were going to do it for free. But I think it is worth exploring what services were provided in the previous contract, and do we need to revisit those? And if they are critical, then we should add it back to the budget. But at this time, I think Robert's recommendation to simply have the camera as that line item makes sense. But
Yeah.
I would ask for consensus that we do revisit the visitor center.
Yes.
And
Yes.
maybe we can do that at the same time we do the Main Street, bringing Main Street back online.
Possibly, I don't.
Yeah.
know.
Aaron, I would suggest for history purposes to keep that line item as it is and create a line item for the $12,000, because if we revisit it, we may want to use this line again at some point in the future. So if we're going to move the 12 to something else, let's create a line for that or find a better classification for it.
Agreed.
Thank you.
So if you're saying that, you're saying leave $20,000 in the budget.
No, I'm not. I'm saying leave that line item for that purpose and put the
Oh, just put
12,000
nothing on
somewhere
it.
else.
Okay, I see what you, okay, I'm
Yeah,
So
sorry.
we
a zero
reserve that
$0 line item
history.
is what you're suggesting, correct, Kelly?
Correct.
Thank you.
Because I want to preserve the history. And if we're going to have the conversation, no matter whom it is that runs it, we want to preserve that line item for that
I see.
expense and for that history of that expense.
And Robert, your memory of what the issue was, you triggered my memory. I think you're 100% correct. It was the visitor center was serving initially the chamber's clientele. And I think what happened was all of the businesses were not, they didn't feel like they were being represented, because not all the businesses had membership. But if I remember correctly, the visitor center then did put those businesses outside the actual visitor center on display, and the paying members' literature was on the inside, if I remember correctly.
Which is the chamber office.
Yes,
Created an
exactly.
area for visitor center literature and information.
Correct.
The stuff that's inside the chamber office is members. So just so it's clear.
The
Yeah.
other thing council may recall is when City Manager Tangeman was here, he added that television that when you come up the stairs, and that was another agreement we had, we would add the television and that has visitor center information on it. So if the chamber office is closed, people can look up on the screen and they can see some of the visitor center stuff. That was part of an agreement that we did to help for when they're closed.
Perfect. Yeah.
And that
about
TV
that.
still exists and there's still running items on it.
And who monitors what information's on that
Melody does.
from the city?
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah, Melody helps with that.
Okay.
So she puts events and different things like that on there.
Thank
That
you.
was something that he brought to the visitor center.
Okay, so to make sure I have this correct in the budget, do we have a consensus? We're going to remove the 20,000 from the visitor center line. We're going to make a new line. We'll call it tourism or camera or something similar for $12,000. Is that my understanding? Everyone?
Aaron, where is the cost of the television? screen that runs city information?
There's no cost to that.
Okay.
It was probably a one-time cost and
Yeah.
then now
Okay.
it probably just projects onto the
Yeah,
screen.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even suggest where you would put the money then for I didn't mean it to come out that way. Wherever you want to put the camera is fine, but I do hope that we will pursue looking at what did we get out of that contract for a visitor center and do we need to bring that back?
Absolutely. Okay. All right.
So
thank
then
you.
you'll put the other 8 back into
Yes.
unrestricted funds.
The 8 will go right back into the budget.
Uh-huh.
It's great to get resolution. All right, the next item that has been updated on page 52 for planning under the personnel department changes. There was the counts were correct, but the change was left at 0 and it actually was a 0.5 increase for the conversion of a part-time to a full-time. So that's been updated on here and it'll be reflected in the budget in the final version. Same thing with Public Works. The additional allocation for the ask for a facilities and grounds maintenance worker. The position count has been updated to 23 now from 22 and 1 additional change from 23 for the 1 additional add. Then we had also in Public Works, there were 2 items. I had put them, I believe, in the front part of the budget, but in the actual department pages on page 56, under where all of the SLARs and additions are added. The capital outlay for median statues for 47,000, which is a one-time expense, was not reflected there, nor was $20,000 has been added for traffic control. This is for the community events, for the parade, and there's one other that I'm forgetting. But the 20,000 is in case we are short on staff and we need to outsource that. We're putting it in the budget as kind of a what if scenario. We hope to not to have to use it, but if we do need to use it, we need to make sure we have the traffic control for the parade if it's needed. All right, and that was all of the items that I believe that we discussed for the most part. It's possible I missed some. The next thing that we talked about, and I know Councilmember Connors has brought this up several times and Councilmember Zuluaga and I discussed it, was regarding the aquatic center. And 2 questions were posed. And the 2 questions were, can we find an effective method to provide free passes to the aquatic center for residents? And on a similar note, can we explore reduced or no cost entry for non-swimmer entries to the aquatic center? So the first one, the real question was, can we add utility passes either for the whole family or whatever that would look like onto the utility bills for all the residents? We did talk to the aquatic center staff. We did explore, obviously not with very much time, but we did explore kind of what that would look like. What would the challenges be? How would the implementation look? At this point, we kind of have unknown revenue impacts of what that would look like. So I don't have a dollar amount to really give you. I mean, I could give you a dollar amount, but I don't think it'll be accurate. And then the challenge also in knowing when those passes would be redeemed, because if you give them like an open, like in my mind, I would envision if we put this on a utility bill in May or June, and then you tell them, hey, you have all summer to use it, we wouldn't exactly have any idea of how many would be redeemed in a single day. So it may cause some operational challenges. And then we did get an answer on the total estimated cost to offer free entry to the non-swimmers, and it's approximately 57,000. And when we say non-swimmers, we're talking about parents bringing their children in that are not going to swim. So Brady did have some safety concerns with that he shared with us. He basically said that once the people are on the deck, whether they're in the pool or not, the lifeguards have to watch them, and so they count into the staffing numbers. And then he also discussed the issues that could arise if the parents stay behind the glass instead of being on the deck. They may not be watching the children, which then could lead to more saves being necessary by the lifeguards and just some other issues. So we asked the aquatic center, well, okay, if you're not recommending those items, what would you recommend? And so if we look at the next slide, they did come up with a couple of interesting suggestions. And we'll come back to those other items after these. So they came up with proposing 4 free entry days for the community where the community could come in for free on these 4 days. They were recommending 2 family days where they would offer free swim classes and free entry for all the families. And then 2 senior days where they would also have other activities and different things of that nature. In addition, they currently do this program for second graders called Learn to Swim, which is a 5-part training to teach the second graders how to swim. And they currently do this for the 3 RE2 schools, that's correct. And so we would look at expanding that to all second graders in the community, regardless of which school they attend. And then they also currently partner with nonprofits, the fire department, I believe the ambulance district and police for raffles and other giveaways. So we would look at expanding that as well. So those were their recommendations. So I would ask council, going back to the first 2, does council have an appetite or an interest in allocating some additional funding for marketing for the aquatic center? Is this something that council would like to explore? Adding additional 50,000 or 75,000 so that we could do some marketing or free passes of this nature. We don't have a dollar amount. I can't say that even if you give us 50, it's going to cost that much because some of these doing the free passes on the utility bill, we don't really have an estimate on what it would cost. The operational costs are probably somewhat negligible. It's the revenue impact that could potentially happen if we give out passes to people and the people who are already going to come use them. That would be probably our biggest revenue impact of loss that we could experience, but I don't think it would be that significant. And Suzanne, you can correct me because Suzanne's been in all the meetings, so I don't want to misspeak, but that's my understanding.
Correct.
So before you go to that though, could you talk about one other part of that? We had talked about it and you said that you looked at the usage
Mhm.
and it looks like we have a higher out of town usage of the pool than we do in town. Can you talk about those numbers?
Yes, so the aquatic center staff believes that based on their analysis, 60% of our usage comes from out of the city and 40% is within the city. And I believe those numbers, I don't have them here to speak about it. I believe those numbers were based on revenue and not daily usage. So what Brady explained is that a lot of our residents in the city, they have either the punch passes or the yearly pass. So they use the pool more frequently, but in the daily usage amount, they pay less because that's how it's designed. If you have the annual pass, it's the cheapest per day. So I believe that's my understanding of how he explained it to us.
That
Yeah.
follows through with our Parks and Rec program as well. So it's not unusual, right? Remember, they were telling us we have, believe it or not, more non-city residents that participate in Parks and Rec programs than city residents. We have a lot of kids out in the outside city limits.
So I have a question. With regards to the utility bill as the vehicle to give free pass or the suggested vehicle. Trail Ridge. Do they have individual utility bills in the units in Trail Ridge?
For water and sewer, no. I don't
Okay.
know about gas and electric.
So we would miss 168 apartments of folks that effectively should receive a pass if that's the vehicle we're going to use that would not be included.
Yeah, there's workarounds. I mean, you can just provide your address and your driver's license. I mean, but tracking
And I
all
think
that stuff.
that's where I think the free days seem more manageable and equitable and provide more opportunity for everyone to participate,
How often is that?
possibly.
They've recommended 4, but again, these
That
things can all be,
Entire year?
that would be for the entire year. And again, these things can be relooked at. This was the initial recommendation.
So for budget discussions, what are we looking for? I mean, I think these are all good ideas. I mean, there've been over the years since the aquatic center opened, people have talked about, can there be a break for residents? Should we start charging the school district for the second grade program? There are a lot of ideas out there about offsetting some of the costs of running an operation that's never going to be profitable. We know that. So are you asking, Robert, that we have a placeholder in there that would either decrease the aquatic center's budget or I think these are all things that should be explored, and I would love to hear Cindy and her team give us a briefing that looks even further into this. I mean, if their challenge is, how do we reward our community? What's the best way to do that and still not impact the ability to operate the aquatic center? So are you asking that we have a placeholder in the budget of less or more money for this concept? What are you looking for?
Well, as he's looked into it, as the staff's looked into it, I recognize that it seems to be quite difficult for council to say yes to give money back to the citizens in a mill credit. And yet we're also taking at the pool. So I recognize we're going to operate that thing at a loss in the foreseeable future. So the question was, okay, what does it look like if we actually create some goodwill at the pool with our citizens in terms of doing some sort of loss leader program that would actually allow greater usage and then bring greater funds? And if you're looking for a dollar amount on it, I would say we just found $8,000, so you could allocate it there and we wouldn't have to get too complicated with anything else. And then if you do find that it exceeds that, then you could come back with a supplemental later on, once we really have something fleshed out that, is realistic.
Okay.
That would be a thought.
The 8,000 will definitely cover the 4 family days. So the family days and the senior days. So that's a start.
I would say that we can have this conversation, that could be a project for the staff to make a recommendation to the council, what some opportunities might be. As you said, we can always do a supplemental after we do that legwork and figure out what might work and what the community might be in favor of. Absolutely. I think giving back to the community at the pool, I think it just makes it more popular and community focused, particularly since we have 60% of outside city users.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
I
Yeah.
don't think my grandkids come to see me anymore. They come to Colorado to the school every summer. Yeah.
Well, it's just such a nice
That's
facility.
pretty awesome.
I'll take it where I can get it with those guys. But I don't disagree with the concept at all. I just don't know if trying to plug it into the budget right now is appropriate. I would like to see a staff analysis of other ways that we can make that happen with the aquatic center for our community. And then go from there. And as Kelly said, we can do a supplemental later
Sure.
if it impacts the budget, but these are not huge numbers, but as Robert's pointed out, it is goodwill with the community.
Sure, I agree. I think there's probably multiple opportunities that we could,
Yeah, the entire
Provide to the
Parks and Rec
community.
program possibly. I don't know.
sure.
Absolutely. So we will work on that. Thank you very much for that feedback. So, but the 8,000 upfront, we would like to reprogram that towards the aquatic centers. Is the council consensus on that?
I'd rather see the analysis first.
Just-
Yeah, exactly. That 8,000 may end up
Maybe more,
being needed somewhere else.
yeah.
Okay, absolutely. So we will get to work on that.
Rusty, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'd like to see the analysis. I want to finish going through all of Robert's line items to see if that's the best place forward, or is it going to be enough? I do want to revisit, Robert, your comment about the mill levy was at 2.5. Now that we have the new numbers, I'm still targeting between 20 and 25%. At the 2.5, we're at 21.39%. And I would like to see the aquatic center proposal. I want to see, what the visitor center adjustment does, whether we end up putting the 8. And then once I see all those other numbers, I would like to come back and look at that mill levy, the temporary mill levy reduction, and maybe we can bump it up to 3. I'm looking at 3.5, but that's without seeing what the impacts of the other things we've just been talking about. So in my mind, I'm starting to look more at a 3% mill levy reduction than the 2.5. And I think we'll stay in that 20 to 25, and you would have the money to do the things you talked about with the aquatics. Those are my thoughts.
When do we need to vote? When do we need to vote on the mill levy?
Not
Is that
until,
part of the budget package or is that
Yes, it is.
a set date?
So the revenue projection for the property tax will be included on the November 16th ordinance. So technically, if we don't have the mill levy resolved tonight, it would be very difficult to have the ordinance correct. So,
Well, we
I mean,
can't,
you
we
can
don't have,
see,
it's a work session. We can't.
But remember, we appropriate expenses based on projected revenues. We do not appropriate revenues.
correct.
And so revenues fluctuate no matter what.
Mhm.
And so once we get through the process and we will certify the mill levy at 15.75, we still have the opportunity
Correct.
to make a decision on what that credit looks like after our budget is appropriated. That we don't appropriate revenues. The revenues are outlined in our budget to show us what sources of funds we have to appropriate to expenditures.
But our certification of the mill levy, is there a set date?
That will, yes, December 15th is usually when we have to have.
And
it
that's what I'm
Yeah,
referring
so,
to.
so that's actually after the budget process would be.
Okay,
mostly
okay.
done.
Yeah. But remember, we're going to certify our mill levy at the level that it's at.
yeah,
The
15.7.
credit will be what is
On-
given,
And so
On
the
the-
credit would be that return to taxpayer.
return to
amount,
taxpayer
so-
dollars.
And-
Once you determine the mill levy reduction you'd like to do, then it'll be whatever that amount is.
Okay.
Yeah, but Robert, I would like to see eventually, coming back to the discussion of can we approach that 3.5? Or at least get to 3 with these new numbers now, because we do have more revenue to play with.
Yes, and that's the
Estimated.
result of the, correct, they are estimates.
They are
Thank you.
estimated
Thank you,
revenues.
Kelly.
They are
Yeah.
not actual.
Yep. And that's why I
Because it is
kind of lean
necessary.
towards the 3 instead of dropping down to the 3.5. But it still would probably keep us above the 20%, which is my goal.
So, Frank, would you talk about what you discovered today?
Yeah, I just, on the, our plan, our comprehensive plan, it has a range of 17 to 25%.
Correct.
And that's over 2 years old, that comprehensive plan. So we didn't actually, in that plan, it doesn't have, any allowances for what this country just went through. And what this city's gone through with the increase of property tax of 30 to 40% next year. So I'm concerned that the 2.5 isn't nearly enough for our citizens. So I have to agree with Rusty. I think it's easy enough to come to 3.5. That keeps us around 20%. That's mid-range of the comprehensive plan, which, like I said, is 2 years old, needs to be updated. There's,
It's every 10 years.
Comp plans are 10-year documents.
well, they're 10 years unless something extraordinary shows up. And actually, this increase in property tax is certainly one of those examples you can use to readdress your plan. So those are just a couple of my comments, but I'd like to see us being at 3.5 or 4. And I think we can do that and still maintain well above 17% in our reserve.
Well, I would like to point out that we're making policy of doing a 17 to 25% reserve on something which is an aspirational document created by the planning department, which was presented to city council, but city council has no say in adopting it as being our policy. So it's aspirational, but it does not lock us into any regulation or requirement or anything else. So I'd just like to point that out about this idea of trying to tie our budget to a comprehensive plan. I think it's more realistic to tie it to what is the best use of the citizens' funds.
The comprehensive plan is the citizens document prepared by a large group of citizens that worked very diligently for a long time to put together a document that helped us plan for the future. It is not a planning department document. It was headed and coordinated by the planning department and the planning commission. And the council accepted it as it was presented by a majority vote. And it's what we have. It's a 10-year document. It costs $100,000 to prepare. Our strategic plan is also another document that the council prepared, which probably should be looked at again. And that also has the same information in it with regards to our fund balance. So I just wanted to make that more clear.
But as we conclude this discussion, this work session, at the last council meeting, we had consensus as a council to provide Aaron with a percentage or a mill levy decrease of 2.5. Now we're beginning to throw around other numbers. Are we asking Aaron at this late date to redo his numbers for this budget? Now that we're going, oh gee, we got a lot of money. Let's change that to 3.5 or even the 5.5 number. The consensus at the last council meeting was 2.5.
Correct.
And again, if we don't have to certify, I mean, as Kelly's pointed out, we by passing the budget, by approving the budget, we will approve the original mill levy. And after that time, we will then discuss a credit to our citizens. So I would say let's get through the first reading and then the public hearing. And then at that 15 December timeframe, we revisit whether or not we're going to credit our citizens with more. And again, you remember, we're crediting property owners. We're not crediting every citizen.
No.
Well, I want to say we're not at the first reading yet, and I want to apologize. We've gone through a change in the way we're doing our budget and the way we're doing our budget exploration as a council. So the expectation that I had in this process, well, one, and I said it to you privately as well as publicly, Aaron, thank you so much for getting our budget clear, transparent. You're giving us now 5-year projections, which we asked for back in the days of Darren Tangeman. It was totally impossible back then. We couldn't even get basic information. So you've taken us a really long way. Our job is to review that as a council. And in the review process, I think some of the tension that we experienced last week was the way we do it. Like I remember clearly, and maybe Rusty, you remember this as well. We would go through this budget page by page. We turn the page. Anybody got anything on this one? Well, I got this. Okay, we talk about the next one, and so we go through the whole book that way. Now, when you presented it, I admit I was out of town when you handed the books out, so I was a bit late in that start, and so I waited for you to present it to us. And I'm like, okay, now I see it. Okay, I see where you're going with it. And you did great to put everything up the front, or a lot of it up the front. And then you were surprised we didn't give you any feedback. Well, because we didn't go through it line by line. We didn't go through it like we usually use, which I was accustomed to. I'm not saying that other councils before us did it different, but. And so when the question started to come up was last workshop, but we got sidetracked into doing the mill before we explored all of the issues. So in answer to, or not an answer, but in kind of comment to Carol's or what you're saying is, yeah, we have a consensus for a mill reduction, but now we've got more findings in where the budget is, more clear numbers. Part of it's because of the election. And so I just want to put on the record for anybody who's bothering to listen to what we're deliberating on, a couple of things. One is, when you started your budget process, you told us you have a 50% unrestricted fund balance reserve, right? Well, I crunched those numbers and you say it on page 22. It's $5,442,000. So that means we have $5.4 million worth of the citizens' money. It's not allocated to anything, but we're holding on to it. When we had an amount, and I can't remember what it was last year, we had maybe, somebody can remind me, maybe 39% or something like that. And we determined that we would allocate 1.2 million of it to pay off the park. And we weren't sure exactly if we would have all of the pieces. We thought we would, but it was like, we didn't know till January whether we could pay that off, but we thought we could. Is that kind of right?
That's pretty close, yeah.
That's pretty close to what it was. Okay, so this year, we've got 50%, and citizens have experienced a 30% increase in their property taxes. And so I asked you, where did you put the rest of the amount different than it was 21.9 at the time, now it's
Correct.
21.39. And you said you put that 30% immediately into the capital improvement fund.
Mhm.
So all those funds that are that the citizens' funds have landed in capital improvements. That's fabulous. We do have some important capital improvements to consider. But we had 1.2 million overage, which we as a council felt we could pay off a debt to the city, and that freed up the citizens, encumbrances on the citizens. And I'm saying, well, now we're trying to carve out 2.5 mil, 3.5 mil out of what's left. But the truth is, it's still all there. And when you look at the amount that you've said are the escalators for the city, I thought I heard you say we have an 8.3% inflation and COLA consideration.
8.3 is the additional expenditures over last year.
Correct, right,
Yeah.
right. So that's the escalator. So I'd say, okay, so we take that number and we say, let's consider that. But there's still a reasonable amount of money left, including capital improvements, where we can look to offsetting the costs. See, the citizens don't realize yet that they're gonna get, they know if they got notice, they're gonna get a 30% increase in their property tax, but they haven't got the bill yet. They'll get the bill next year. And then we're gonna say, yep, we gave you back $88. Versus what we could do. And so looking at those numbers, Rusty, I'm very grateful you've decided to move up in your findings to 3.5%. I think quite realistically, we can do 10.25 as a mill levy, which is a 5.5 mil reduction, which is under $1 million. It's 954,000 and change. That puts us at a fund balance of 17.37. Well, there's one other number in here that we have as a reserve that we haven't talked about, and that's the Tabor reserve. That's 3.6 something percent. I don't know if I got the exact number. 3.6117% of a reserve. It's like $451,000. So you take that and you add it to the other amounts that we have as an unfunded, unrestricted fund balance, that puts us over 17%. So anyway, I look at this and say, quite realistically, we can give the citizens back, where's that other slide go? $954,655.72. Do our capital projects. It's not like we're not moving forward with our capital projects. We are. And from what the city engineers told me, Kip's told me, the planning to deploy these capital projects is now in engineering, in drawings, and getting it shovel ready. And that's part of the reason some of the projects didn't happen this year. I understand, like with Lake, it didn't happen because it wasn't
Correct.
right. So we're not being unreasonable to consider giving back to the community for their own considerations while we move forward and get necessary things done. We're not like, I know a lot of times people are afraid to say, yeah, well, once we had a really bad thing happen, so we're going to overcompensate. And I think allocating that 50% is overcompensating not to consider a fair return back to the citizens. And so I look at it and it's like, if we were to give the citizens back $954,655, they'd get about almost $200 back. I think 193 or something was your figure back on their taxes. Oh yeah, okay, it's on the slide. 193.63. That makes a difference. That makes a reasonable difference. It doesn't cause us to in any way sweat the changes and the planning that we've got, the forward motion we've got going. And I think once again, it shows goodwill. It shows we're in this together. We're not trying to take every dollar that we can. And we can live with the numbers that are here without having to take all, look, there's the paper, they've each experienced a paper gain of 30%. And they're after paying out of their pocket that 30%. And it's just paper. The market can change. We don't know where it's going. And so I just like us to consider in conclusion that, Rusty, I appreciate the fact that you're changing. You too can see that we have a significant reserve. And seeing this is going to go to a vote, it's not just a consensus. I would like to put it on the table that
Thank you.
we look at a 5.5 mil reduction.
Thank you, Robert. Council, any other people like to have comments? And do you have any further questions and items that you wanted to ask and go over with the council? We have to clear out and let them set up for planning commission. So I want to be sure that we get through all the questions that were coming this evening from everyone.
Aaron, I want to thank you for putting together these numbers. It's very helpful. It's very clear too.
Yeah, appreciate the new slides. Thank
I
you.
do.
Thank you.
One other thing you did say,
Mhm.
Wastewater, you had pages missing.
Yes.
What's going to
we'll
happen
get-
with that?
We'll get those added in.
You'll get those
They're,
added.
they're just. they were
Anything
omitted.
significant we need to know about in the missing pages?
Everything for wastewater is correct in the front of the book. It's just the actual detailed pages we're missing. So they'll just be added in. There was no changes to them.
Okay.
So.
And we did that last year too, unfortunately.
Okay.
Kip's like, come on, why do you not? We do care. Wastewater, we care about you very much. We just keep missing.
I have just a couple of comments because this is a work session. We will not be voting. We can't talk about issues which you brought up again. But I would like both Kelly and Aaron to explain why we can't touch the Tabor Reserve. That is not something that we can add to our unrestricted.
Do you want to do, you want me to?
You can go ahead if you like.
Well, the Tabor Reserve is calculated, it's approximately 3% of the expenditures in the general fund. And that is set aside for emergencies that can be used, and it is for an emergency. However, it has to be the first thing appropriated and returned and expended out of the next year's revenues
Correct.
to replace that reserve. So in effect, it is not available because it has to be, if that level has to be returned each year, and it's part of the audit. It's an adjusting entry to reclassify the unreserved, undesignated fund balance to keep it at that level so that we earmark, if you will, it's a terrible word, but to be sure that we always have that in reserve for emergencies.
Right, and if emergency happens, we can use it.
But
So
we have to replace it
yeah.
immediately.
understood.
It's
Understood,
essentially
yeah.
never
It just
available
is,
to us.
it's never
Yeah,
available
right.
because it's a placeholder.
When
It
we did,
always stays there.
question for you, when we did the pool and we got down to 114,000, 112,000, whatever, was there any option for the city to use the Tabor funds?
No.
Oh,
In
definitely
that
not.
No.
case with our
No.
budget?
No,
Absolutely.
So what is considered an emergency with Tabor?
a fire, a flood,
Mhm.
disaster, natural disaster,
So what
something
is our
unexpected.
insurance pay?
I-
Does our insurance pay for all those?
No.
No,
Not everything, no.
What does it pay for a building if the city hall
It would pay
burns
for
down?
Our building that burns down, but it
Right.
wouldn't pay for the residents' homes and,
Oh, no, but you wouldn't use Tabor funds to pay for resident homes.
no.
Well, I'm just saying, we have
Yeah.
insurance for the disasters of our property, so.
that is in the Constitution and we're
I know what the
required to retain
Constitution
that.
says. I certainly
Other
understand.
other communities have dipped into that Tabor Reserve for, let's say we had a fire here and we had to set up a helipad. And FEMA doesn't pay for helipads to fight fires. In
Correct.
fact,
Good
FEMA
example,
doesn't
sure.
do a whole heck of a lot at all with fires. So if we had to construct very quickly a helipad or some other something probably more than likely that would be related to fire, not to flooding or one of the other declared disasters that FEMA would be able to respond to. We could use that Tabor Reserve for that, but then we would have to replace it the following budget year.
I know
And you
that-
don't just do it automatically. You have to request the authority to even draw that Tabor reserve out.
The other, I know that we talked about it during the fires, Kelly and I were both here for them. When, Highway 24 is closed and nobody can get in or out and there's no gasoline and the stores have no groceries, and then there's a huge loss of sales tax dollars. And that kind of thing, could be used for that.
Well, I certainly see how
Yeah.
that would be used for employees' salary if we did have
Correct.
something like that where the
Correct.
highway was shut down and we had no income. I certainly understand that. But we also have insurance for those things.
The purpose for the reserve is to assure that we always have savings in order to respond to emergencies immediately. But once that emergency is over and the next budget year comes along, we're required to reimburse that to keep that level available at all times. It's like cash in the mattress. We have to keep that cash level in the mattress there always so that we don't spend all of our reserves in case we need it for those emergency situations. It's just a reserve.
we have
It's not an
Two
expenditure line.
mattresses.
Which is the second one?
Just, others things.
Oh, Tabor and then our, yeah, our.
Yeah,
our-
my point was only that Tabor's got a lot of requirements that go with it, that Tabor Reserve, and it truly is for, I would say, reacting very quickly, very immediately to a natural disaster. And our second reserve, the one that we're discussing, whether it should be 17% or 25%, is more fungible. I just have
Yeah.
begun to learn that word here recently,
a good word.
watching what's going on with Iran and Hamas and whatever. But at any rate, my point is, don't think that Tabor Reserve can be added to the equation. It is very, very difficult to use, and I don't want to even think about the circumstance where we may have to use it.
Well, in conclusion, and I realize we have about 1 minute left. Aaron, thank you for preparing this for this evening. And we're till 5:30.
We have
so I'm-
till 6,
Yes,
but
have
we
a
need
half
to
an
give.
hour.
Oh, we have
time
till
to-
6?
We
Yes.
we
Oh.
have time.
Planning Commission is 6:30.
Yeah, Robert, I was.
I was
wanting to
wondering why
find
only
out-
Don was here. I was wondering where the rest of them were.
Yeah, and Robert, you were the one last week. Well, let's face it, 3 years in a row, we've done it a different way, where we did go line by line. When we kind of reversed the
Pleasure of the
order,
council.
starting with the mill, and now we're doing the line by line. I just want to make sure that you are comfortable and have identified all the lines that you wanted to discuss, because that could change, the numbers we're looking at anyway. Have we gone through all of the lines you wanted to bring up?
Yes, Aaron has very comprehensively prepared that in what he's presented to us here. And out of that comes my comments in conclusion and recommendation that we look at more of a 5.5 mil credit as opposed to a 2.5 mil. And it's been something that we've had consensus to, but now we're going to get to the point we're doing first reading. And I would just like to make it known that I think we need to be higher in our mill reduction to the mill credit to the citizens. And my recommendation is 5.5. I'm okay if you look at 4. I think that's probably listening to the tone of the rest of you, a better.
Yeah,
a
thank you,
more
Robert. I
realistic.
think we got. the
Well, I
message
think
from you
2.5
already.
is
Thank
is
you.
a slap in the face. I think it's very silly to think that
Thank you.
the citizens get that. And so
Can
you're gonna bring it as a first reading. And because it's so shamefully low, in my opinion, it makes it difficult for me to say yes to the budget, period. And I'd like to say yes to the budget because you've done a fabulous job. But I am not okay not to represent the fiduciary responsibility to our citizens. And so there's a difference between consensus and a vote. And so I'm putting that out there to the rest of you to go, okay, are you so hard and fast on 2.5 mil that that's where you're going and you're going to take it to the citizens for that and let them know that that's their level of value that they are to you.
Robert, thank you. I think we've got your message. Anything
and-
else, Rusty? Do you have anything else you'd like to share with the
Well,
council?
I just want to make sure all the council members are comfortable going through. Frank, last time you, I picked up on a vibe that you may have had some things you wanted to talk about. Do you feel like everything has been covered that you would like to bring out?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay. I know Catherine is not on, I don't think.
She is not, Rusty. She's dealing with things in Dallas, like traffic and children.
Got it. And Carol,
Such-
you, we haven't worked together on the budget, so I don't know how detailed you like to go. I'm comfortable with the line item at this point. I don't have anything else, but I want to make sure you feel comfortable too.
Rusty, and I have a question for you, and that is you had a number of line item questions for Aaron as well. And do you feel that you have expressed those so the citizens see what your eyes see?
Yes, actually, in the first one, I got with Aaron after, they were more just, it was like the DDA line item was wrong. I gave those to him, he made the corrections. I am comfortable at the line item, like we've done in the past.
Thank you, Rusty. Anyone else have anything that they'd like to share? Looks like we're done.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Aaron, for everything.
Thanks.
Thank you. I know, sorry, we have no dinner tonight.
You're not gone, you guys got snacks.
All right.